Hi, everyone. Thank you very much. I'm enjoying this day immensely. It's been a lot of fun. I'm very happy to see all the students here. It's always wonderful to see the next generation coming forward. And so with my talk, I titled my talk, A Foot in the Door. So I work with snails, which have very big foot, and that is a foot sitting on top of the arrow. And it's a tenuous, but I think real connection between the work that Marie Daly has done and why it's important that you keep hearing this word trailblazers and people who open doors and make things possible. And this is something that I feel venomous snails are doing for us in chemistry by making a lot of things possible that we didn't think about before. So I first heard about Marie from Jeanette Brown, who is here in the audience. Hi, Jeanette. So she's another pioneer. She's an awesome pioneer. Can you slow this, please? Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Jeanette was one of two African-American students to get a degree from Hunter College in the chemistry departments, one of the first. She was also the first, she's also the first African-American to receive a degree from the University of Minnesota Department of Chemistry. And the way that we interacted was when she, oh, awesome, yay. When she, from her book, which you've seen, held up earlier. This book is amazing. I recommend it for all the students and everyone in the audience to read. She wrote that book about famous African-American chemists, and she was making a sequel, and she gave me a call and asked me if I would be interested in being in the book. I, of course, was very flattered because now she wanted to talk about modern African-American chemists. And so I was very flattered to be chosen to be a part of that book. So thank you, Jeanette. And I'm very happy that you're here today. And so in reading Jeanette's original book is where I learned Marie Daly's story. And she definitely is a trailblazer, the way that everyone's been describing. And again, just to quickly go over, she's a New Yorker, like some of you students. She grew up in Queens. She went to Hunter High School, which is here in Manhattan. She was a Wolverine, so that's where she probably became so tenacious. And then she went to Queens College, as you've heard, where she got her BS. And then here at Columbia is where she got her PhD. And so she really was, to me, kind of a trailblazer, working with Marie Caldwell, another trailblazer, very famous chemist who had who was in a wheelchair, but able to do many things that at that time probably wheelchair assisted people were not allowed to do. And then she went to Rockefeller to work, as you heard, with Alfred Mirsky. And so she really, for me, was blazing a trail very similar to my own existence, right? So similar to her, my parents were immigrants. This is the lovely Winston and Janice and the young Mandë. And so we grew up in Brooklyn, not Queens, but still New York, you know. I went to Brooklyn Tech High School, Tech Night for Life. And then I also am a product of CUNY, the way that Marie was. I went to Rockefeller to get my PhD. She was at Rockefeller as an associate for a while. I even have a slight foot in the door at Columbia because I came here to learn NMR from Anne and Art Palmer. And so I have that connection as well. So it seemed to me that there was a lot of similarities when I was reading her story. And it was amazing because you think that you're living your life, right? But there's so many that came before us that led similar paths. The one place in which we sort of diverged is Marie really always truly wanted to be a scientist, in part because her father wanted to be a scientist, but didn't get a chance to do so. He came here from the West Indies on a scholarship at Cornell University, but he couldn't stay there because he had a family and had economic reasons and other things for why he couldn't do it. But he instilled in his daughter the love of science at a time when there were not a lot of women in science, period, nevertheless, an African-American woman in science. So her path to science was almost, you can say, innate. Mine was not. So I thought I was going to be a track star. I grew up running all throughout the city. I ran in Colgate. I ran in all these things, and I won all these races. And so while I was in college, I was on the track team, and we went to the University of Pennsylvania relays. So if you know this, it's kind of like the filtering ground for the Olympics. So my team, we finished dead last in every single race. And so I was like, I am not Olympic material. right? I am never, ever going to be in the Olympics. So I needed a plan B. And this again is where science educators, like we just heard about, are so, like Sabrina was mentioning, are so important. And so for me, that came in the form of Dr. Larry Johnson. Larry Johnson was a physical chemist at the college where I went to my undergrad, and he invited me into his lab one summer to work with him. And I had no idea what that meant, even though I went to tech high school and all these things, because science was always taught as we know, we know, we know. I wish I had a vibranium exercise when I was going through it. But Larry was a physical chemist. He took me into his lab. We were burning holes into molecules, making liquid nitrogen ice cream, all of that stuff. And I was like, you get paid for this? And he's like, yes, you are. And so, yes, you do. And that set me on my chemistry path. And so I was like, I can do this for life because this is a lot of fun. And so the way that Marie and I actually connect in science, though, is through her work with hypertension, which you learned a little bit about in the first lecture. So with her work in hypertension, Marie did the groundwork for what the biochemical and metabolic issues are that occur with hypertension. And so the drugs that are used to treat hypertension come from venom. So I'm very excited. So the two main drugs, captopril and enalapril, were both from this protein that's found from the pit viper snake from Brazil. And it's exactly this motif that's found in the protein, the WAP, tryptophan, alanine, proline motif that becomes the small molecule mimic that is used to treat hypertension all around the world, right? So captopril is an ACE inhibitor, angiotensin converting enzyme, and the other one is the Bandichin potentiating peptide. And so together, these treatments all came from the fact that this little snake that lives in Brazil, not bothering anybody, but it came and we characterized the venom and found these very strong drugs. So the connection to Marie's work, who laid the foundation a little bit for understanding how hypertension works, led to these breakthroughs that we're seeing today. So now you're in my world. So we've leaped from Marie to venom. And so this is my world. So hidden under the sand is a snail. This is why we call them killer snails. The orange thing is a tongue. It's going to inject into this fish venom, and you'll see what happens. This is real time. We don't speed it up. Awesome. So the snail will come out of the sand and it's going to swallow the fish whole. Isn't that amazing? This is why I study venom. So it really is what the venom is doing is it's transforming. You can see that again, I think, because that's awesome. The venom transform a physical warfare into a biochemical warfare. And so these snails, they don't even have to move, really. You'd think the fish should win, right? The fish should swim away. But the venom is so powerful. It's so fast acting. It's so potent, and it's so specific. All the ingredients you need to make a drug that the fish never had a chance, right? So it's just going to swallow this thing whole and enjoy itself on a very, very fishy meal. So my snails are not these kinds of snails. They're not the garden variety snail or the ones that you can butter up on a plate and serve. These are not my snails. My snails are trailblazing, kick-ass, ready to go. They're very good. These are my snails, right? And so they're that because they have venom, right? So venom is made up of several compounds, small molecules, peptides, and proteins. I mostly work on the peptides. And no two snails have exactly the same venom arsenal. So each snail has its own unique cocktail of more than 250 peptides and proteins. And each species, snails, snakes, spiders, scorpions, all of them have this venom arsenal that's made up of small molecules, peptides, and protein. None of them exactly the same. But what they do that's the same is they attack these conserved areas. They attack very important things. They go for your blood, your brain, and your membranes. So we call them hemotoxic, neurotoxic, and cytotoxic. So they basically are looking to destroy and shut down and cause damage. And that's what they do in the cells if you inject all of the venom all at once. But what they're also very good at is manipulating signals. So if you're able to identify which parts of the venom are very good at shutting down or breaking holes into cells or affecting the hemoglobin, then you've essentially got a drug that can manipulate cellular communication, especially communication that's malfunctioning. And so venoms have contributed to breakthroughs both in fundamental research and in translational research. In fundamental research, venom has been used to do mapping mostly of the brain, right? And not just the brain. It's been integral to mapping a lot of physiological reactions in the body using things like tetrodotoxin and bungartoxin. Botox is a venom. Did you know that? All of us that do these injections, you guys are too young up there. The rest of us, some of us might go into that. And so venom, the other way it's been used in translational research is that it's really provided these blockbuster drugs. So I told you about captopril, but there are many others, including a drug from the snails, right? So there's a drug called Prialt that comes from our killer snails, and it's used to treat chronic pain in HIV and cancer patients. So a lot of the drugs previously come from snakes because they're easy to milk. You can get lots and lots of venom. So access and opportunity usually drove what kind of venomous organisms got studied. But in my lab, I wanted to focus on these killer snails. So a lot of research on killer snails come from things called cone snails, called that way because they're shaped like an ice cream cone, but please do not lick. This is not for licking. The others are terebrids, terotoxins, and turids. So in my lab, we focus mostly on the terebrid snails. And so we were the first to sort of construct a molecular phylogeny of these snails, family tree of snails, indicating which ones were actively using venom to pursue their prey and which ones were not. So kind of like follow the yellow brick road. Here you follow the black brick road. And wherever you see a black line indicates a lineage of these snails that are actively using venom. So we use this to build this roadmap to identify venom usage. And then we also then classified the venom peptides themselves using this sort of multi-omics approach where we combine transcriptomics and proteomics. And so we identified over 3,000 of these unique novel peptides, never before seen, and we're trying to now investigate their function in terms of pain and cancer. And so in characterizing their activity in pain, so Prialt is a breakthrough drug. Prialt is a breakthrough because it's an analgesic compound, but it doesn't work on opioid receptors, right? So what's the bad thing about opioids? Go ahead. Somebody up there, the kids know, what's the bad thing about opioids? They're addictive, right? So the snail drug is not addictive because it doesn't work on opioid receptors. It works on something else. But you can't swallow it like a pill. So it has to be delivered by an intrathecal injection, so a spinal tap. No one's volunteering for that. So in the lab, what we're trying to do is look for novel analgesic peptides that can be delivered peripherally, so taken orally or injected in peripheral manners. And we have identified a few peptides now using flies, where if we fed them the peptide or we injected it peripherally, it had activity. We also then are looking for new activities in terms of drug development in cancer and how do we treat cancer. So the thing with cancer is that right now, doesn't discriminate between healthy cells and tumor cells, the current treatments. And so we thought the selectivity and specificity of these peptides would allow us to be able to do just that. Find drugs that were selected for tumor cells, but not normal cells. And one of the peptides we found by screening in a series of different cancer cell lines, cervical, neuroblastoma, prostate, we found one peptide that was very effective in let's say, inhibiting tumor cell growth. Not as good as doxorubicin, which kills everything, but it's also very good. It's a good start for us. And that peptide turned out to be TV1, which we'd identified before. We synthesized it synthetically in the lab, folded it. And when you're doing that, you then run a mass spec to show that the thing that you have synthesized chemically matches the thing that you've extracted organically from the animal. And it turns out that it did. So it's like check. So these are like bringing your receipts, right? Yes, we made the thing that we think we were going to make. And so we think the way that the TV1 is acting is basically blocking TRP channels, preventing calcium from entering the cell, which leads to a bunch of downstream things that eventually inhibit proliferation of the tumor and growth and induces apoptosis. So this model of where we're trying to use peptides to look at and deliver selective drugs for cancer is a new way of thinking about cancer treatments. Most scientists and researchers, when they're thinking about cancer treatments, they look for things that enter into the cell. They talk about small molecules. They talk about specific targets. Here, with using peptides, we're thinking of a new way in which we can target those receptors that are just on tumors and not on healthy cells. And so the other way in which Marie was a trailblazer was in her really wanting to enable the next generation. Throughout her career, she was always working with students from underrepresented groups. She was always trying to run programs to develop things to get them into the graduate program at Albert Einstein, where she ended up her career. And in the end, she established a fund at Queens College in her parents' name, where they can give back money to students who are at Queens College and have an interest in science. I think that's amazing. And she's been doing this all throughout her career. It started way before making this fund. And she did this, she attended this conference in 1975, this Conference of Minority Women Scientists, which I think is amazing. If you look at who attended this conference, it's not just her, right? But we have Shirley Ann Jackson, we have Lawson, we have Hopkins, we have all of these trailblazers of women in science who weren't just the Black women. They also had Hispanic women there. They had Puerto Rican and Mexican women. They also had indigenous women there. So this was in 1975 when they had this seminal meeting. A young Shirley Malcolm at AAAS was convening this meeting along with colleagues. And what came out of it was this double bind that you heard referenced before in an earlier speech. And this double blind report had a bunch of recommendations for how we could increase the participation of women and underrepresented groups in science. And we're still having that conversation today, right? Years and years and years later. And so in a similar way, I'm trying to do something with 2030 STEM where we increase STEM inclusivity and pathways to leadership. So basically working with a series of high-level individuals. We work on salons, we write white papers, we try to identify what are the barriers. This thing is just going crazy. What are the barriers in order for us to build a better STEM world? And then because Venom is so exciting, not just to scientists, but to kids of all ages, we also work on making video games and learning games and immersive games and tabletop games, where we try to talk about how Venom is the coolest thing ever. Superheroes are good. They're good. But Venom is absolutely amazing. And so the latest game we're working on is something called Venom Collab, where we talk about vampires, snails, snakes, sea anemones, scorpions, and try to teach middle school students about collaborative research because nobody does it alone. Marie was a trailblazer, but she was not alone. She had several mentors. She had Cal Caldwell here, she had Mirsky, she had her father, she had a whole team of people working with her to be able to succeed. And that's exactly what we need now. We also need a team of people working with us to encourage us. And so part of this game is showing students that science is never done in silo. It's integrated, it's inclusive, and it requires a lot of input from several people. So Marie was definitely a trailblazer. She was an inspiration in ways that, as Dean Carlos mentioned in the beginning, in ways that she probably didn't want to be. She didn't want to be the one that put the foot in the door. She didn't want to be the one to be first everywhere she went, but she took that on and she did it well, and she did it with grace. And so I'm hoping that she put that foot in the door, which led to Killer Snails. So I thank you, and I thank all the members of the lab, the funders, and I thank you for your time.